The New York State Barge Canal was once the lifeline of the state, powering its rise as an industrial giant. Stretching an impressive 525 miles, it connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic, fostering an era of unrivaled economic expansion, transforming entire towns into booming hubs of commerce. But beneath the surface of this engineering marvel lies a story of fierce ambition, staggering costs, and eventual decline. So, how did this canal system go from an economic powerhouse to a relic of a bygone era? Stay tuned to find out, as today we uncover the history of the New York State Barge Canal. I'm your host, Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. This video is brought to you by Delete Me. Imagine all of your personal information, name, addresses, or phone number, being publicly exposed without your consent. Well, unfortunately, this is the reality for over 100 million Americans due to a recent massive data breach, and if that concerns you, you're not alone. With threats like this growing daily, protecting our data online is more crucial than ever. That's where our sponsor, Delete Me, comes in. Delete Me helps you remove your personal information from data brokers' databases, which otherwise sell your information to anyone willing to pay a few dollars for it. This type of privacy concern doesn't just expose you to identity theft, it also puts you at risk for personal attacks based on your political views or even your profession. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about here. We've all heard those stories about people being harassed or scammed because of their information, which is readily available online. So what can you do about it? Well, Delete Me is a solution. It's a service that deletes your personal information like names, addresses, and phone numbers from the sites where data brokers store it. But here's the best part. Delete Me doesn't just remove your data once. It keeps monitoring these sites to ensure that your information does not resurface. This has helped me so much. As a content creator, I need to be extra careful with the personal information that I share online. And thanks to Delete Me, I've removed old listings like addresses and other personal data from over 100 sites that I didn't even previously know about. So now I feel much safer knowing that my information is being protected. So get 20% off Delete Me US consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/Socash and use promo code Socash at checkout. Although the New York State Barge Canal is a marvelous display of human genius, it did not appear out of thin air. In fact, it had several predecessors whose early history is ultimately tied to these achievements, starting with the Erie Canal. When this project was first devised, it was founded on creating a, quote, bond of union between the Atlantic and Western states, so that, quote, it may prevent the dismemberment of the American empire. Or at least that's how Clinton, the then governor of New York, once put it. Policymakers at the time wanted to create a canal in New York that would unite a great swath of land by connecting various bodies of water. They planned to stimulate the economy and connect the American land through water travel and commerce. In addition, the deposits of rich river soil and fertile stretches of land across the state provided a good incentive to construct the canal, since the agriculture would immediately become affiliated with a significant market beyond, bringing immense profit. With this profit in mind, the future of New York City itself was also predicted. This canal would stand at the entrance of the Hudson River and thus be connected to the water of the then already existing Erie Canal. Although ideas for a canal began to take shape as early as 1791, and some improvements were made to speed that up, these early efforts fell very short of what was actually needed. The construction of a Grand Canal in New York State began after it was given authorization in 1817. At first, many hesitated, referring to the project as, quote, Clinton's Big Ditch, and mocking the then governor at every turn. Well, Clinton's Big Ditch turned out to be the impressive Erie Canal. It opened on October the 26th, 1925, and the state would never be the same. The brand new canal ran down the middle of the state, beginning in Buffalo, and eventually meeting the Hudson River around the New York town of Troy. Celebratory cannons blew across sections of the waterway and welcomed in a new era of westward expansion. Almost overnight, an economic explosion began around the canal and the Great Lakes to which it connected. Settlements from Cleveland, Ohio, to New York City experienced an influx of commerce. So inspired by this great project, the US continued its further canal work. Other New York canals would eventually become tied to the State Barge Canal, including the Champlain Canal, which opened in 1823 as a connector between the Hudson River and Lake Champlain, the Oswego Canal, opened in 1828 as a connector between the Erie Canal and Lake Ontario, and of course, the Cayuga-Seneca Canal, which opened in 1828, connecting the Erie Canal with the Cayuga Lake and Seneca Lake. For the various canals of New York to keep up with the rapid advancement of trade and maritime travel technology, they concluded that continued updates were still needed to the system. First of all, they needed to support the newer boats being used for trade to keep up with the increasing traffic entering the inland of America. Enlarging these canals allowed New York residents to enjoy massive commerce growth in the first part of the 19th century. By 1862, the depth of the Erie Canal was 7 feet, with a limit of up to 240 tons, a massive increase from that original 4-foot depth and 30-ton freight limit. By 1882, the year the Erie Canal tolls were abolished, the overall profit grew to $42 million, quite a hefty sum for the time. As the century drew to a close, New York's canal system faced mounting challenges. The rapid rise of railroads had revolutionized transportation, offering faster and more efficient options for moving goods and people alike. Meanwhile, the Erie Canal and its connecting waterways, once symbols of engineering innovation, were struggling to keep pace with these modern demands. By the early 20th century, it was clear that significant upgrades were needed to preserve the canal's role in New York's economy. This growing need for modernization brought New Yorkers to a pivotal moment. On November the 3rd, 1903, voters were presented with a proposal to transform the state's aging canal system into what would become the New York State Barge Canal. This ambitious project aimed to adapt the waterways to accommodate larger barge vessels, making freight transport more cost-efficient and competitive with railroads. The stakes were high. Critics argued that the $101 million price tag, a staggering sum at the time, was an unjustifiable expense, particularly when railroads seemed to have eclipsed canals as the dominant mode of transportation. Yet the project won overwhelming approval, with 75% of the 1.1 million voters in favor. This support came largely from the population centers at the east and west ends of the Erie Canal, where communities recognized the vital role that the canal played in their economic survival. The vote also marked a turning point in the history of New York's waterways overall. It set in motion one of the most ambitious canal improvement projects of the day, securing the future for the canal system, at least for a while, in the face of ever-changing transportation trends. Now, before going further, it's key that we understand the significance of a barge canal as opposed to any other inland waterway. A barge is a large boat with a flat bottom designed to carry freight through rivers or canals. It was argued that the barge canal would accommodate commerce flowing from the Atlantic to the Great Lakes because it was much cheaper to transfer cargo in barges rather than ocean-based ships. This is because a barge canal could carry nearly as much cargo as a ship canal, making the additional cost of building a larger canal unnecessary. Another point was that a barge canal system would allow boats to either propel themselves or to be pulled by tugboats, rather than by unreliable horses or mules assigned to walk in tow paths along the canals to pull the boats. Thus, a barge canal was settled on. As alluded to earlier, the New York State Barge Canal was created on the backs of several other New York canals which already existed. The Erie Canal is a keystone supporting this project, offering a direct path from the Atlantic through the Hudson and its main segment to the Great Lakes. The Champlain Canal, Oswego Canal, Cayuga, and Seneca were also integral to the proposed combined project. Hence, when construction began, engineers prioritized using the natural water paths wherever possible, reducing the need for costly and labor-intensive elevated waterways. This approach allowed them to integrate the canal system into existing landscapes much more efficiently. To achieve this vision, laborers and engineers relied on a variety of excavation methods, from rock cutting to dredging, each tailored to their challenging terrain. These methods, along with the introduction of groundbreaking machinery like excavators, not only shaped the waterway, but helped improve just how large-scale this construction project could be. The construction of locks, reservoirs, and guard gates also required complex solutions that pushed the boundaries of what was possible back then. These structures would become the defining features of the New York State Barge Canal, cementing its place as one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects of its era. The degree to which a canal alters its landscape is mind-boggling. Beginning in 1905, the construction of the New York State Barge Canal involved many different methods and structures that helped engineers achieve these goals. One primary method of canal construction is by rock cut, by where removing rocks from a particular area near a water source brings in a new leg of a waterway. And the support infrastructure around the project was massive. Temporary railroads were set up to move the workers with their hammers and chisels to new locations as the project evolved. Another common site at a New York State Barge Canal construction zone would have been an excavator, as I mentioned previously, a machine similar to those that we still see at construction sites today. An excavator, using a bucket at one end of its boom, could remove much more material than a human body could ever handle. These machines were primarily used to widen existing channels, taking the sides and spreading them further. A similar machine is called a dredge. There were dipper dredges, which acted as large and powerful shovels, or hydraulic dredges, which removed sediment through suction from the bottom of a water source. These machines didn't only widen the canal, but they also made them deeper. One of the most noteworthy feats of the barge system's construction was the creation of its locks. A lock allows a ship to be raised or lowered to different portions of a waterway by adjusting the water level in a controlled system. As concrete began to be used for these locks, they became much more significant and could support a wide array of canal vessels. The lock systems found throughout this canal garnered serious attention, as in many ways, even to this day, it remains a tremendous technological leap. For example, the lock at Little Falls lifted travelers 40.5 feet up into its construction, more than any lock in the Panama Canal. Also, the world's first siphon lock was located in Oswego. Americans were feeling very optimistic about this new achievement, with the public and political class alike agreeing that the investment was well worth the price tag. One primary aim of the project was to incorporate a path that barges would travel into the Mohawk River, between Troy and Rome, a distance of about 114 miles. This idea differed from the way that commerce mainly traveled through the paralleled Erie Canal between those two same locations. This is another example of engineers trying to utilize the natural landscape that they were given rather than relying on human-made canals. From Rome, the path of the barge canal was constructed to travel through the Oneida Lake, Oneida River, Seneca River, Clyde River and Canal, from around Rochester to around Lockport, before eventually reaching the Tonawanda Creek and Niagara River. Boats could thus travel to any of the Great Lakes and back to the Atlantic Ocean from the Niagara River itself. Other connections that involved engineering projects integral to the new barge system included the Oswego River, which was for all practical purposes turned into a canal in its own right. From there, it hit Lake Ontario. When piecing together all of these new canalizations and trudging all of the machinery to different points in the river, they easily deduced that the canal's western end would use the Niagara River as its source. However, things became much more difficult when considering the eastern side. The solution they devised was to create two storage reservoirs, one at the source of the Mohawk River, where the town of Delta once stood, and the other on a branch at the town of Hinckley. Thus, two dams were created, the Delta Dam and the Hinckley Dam. Although the construction of the Delta Dam destroyed the town it was named after, the dam has done much good, such as controlling floods, which has aided in the survival of many adjacent settlements. The Hinckley Dam continues to provide water for around 130,000 people near Utica. Another cool side effect is that the reservoir can be used for recreation year-round and provides hydropower. These dams were primarily used to regulate the water depth and support travel of commercial vehicles. Engineers had to build bridges, which were necessary despite not directly aiding in the canals themselves, but adding a huge burden to the project. Since, depending on what was needed, both stationary and lift bridges were constructed. Guard gates are the last structure we often overlook. These structures helped shut off sections of the New York State Barge Canal by using large steel gates supported by concrete grounded steel towers. They could help with flooding, redirect vessels, and shut off areas so that workers could fix any issues. Guard gates were scattered across the entire system, appearing on the side of the waterway every 10 miles or so. Overall, the construction of the New York State Barge Canal allowed boats to transport 100 times the cargo that the Erie Canal ever permitted. With that, New York was ready to welcome another era of elevated commerce. Ultimately, the price ended up being around $170 million to build this thing. That was nearly 50% over budget. The revamped Champlain Canal opened in the spring of 1916. The Oswego Canal and the eastern portion of the Erie Canal opened in 1917. And finally, the long-awaited New York State Barge Canal, which had been worked on at this point for about 13 years, opened collectively in 1918. Needless to say, the public was eager to see what had been accomplished. Although somewhat overlooked, this new canal system rivaled the Panama Canal in many ways, to the extent that it became a symbol of local pride and heritage, as many residents were proud to be connected to the world via the water. During World War I, when America experienced a heightened sense of nationalism, commerce-related projects, like the New York State Barge Canal, saw exacerbated use to support the war effort. For example, in the Ithaca Times, one journalist wrote, quote, "The opening of the New York State Barge Canal to navigation today is one of the most important events in our history, and certainly one of the utmost significant insofar as it relates to our transportation arrangements during the war." Many business leaders and panel speakers also asserted that the new canal could help relieve railroad congestion, which had already become a primary travel method for inland commerce. Figures like Calvin D. Tompkins, who was a member of the Inland Waterway Commission and Federal Railroad Administration, spoke adamantly about the coordination effort between the two entities. Eventually, many locations along the canal also acquired railroad connections, which allowed for a quick exchange of freight between land and water carriers. By 1925, 7 years after the grand opening of the State Barge Canal, nearly 74% of New Yorkers lived within 2 miles of this waterway, highlighting the canal's profound impact on shaping communities and settlement patterns across the entire state. Perhaps this effect was best illustrated by a 1918 Buffalo newspaper article that stated, quote, "Since the opening of the greatest inland waterway, the New York State Barge Canal, the eyes of the great manufacturers of the country have been opened to Buffalo's wonderful possibilities. Buffalo has added more than 400 new manufacturing plants to its number in the past 5 years, a growth equal to the largest manufacturing cities in the United States. Meaning laborers experienced many new opportunities." On the water itself, 4 main carrier crafts cruised the canal. The first model was 150 feet long, with a 20-foot beam, 12-foot sides, and a 650-ton capacity. These were typically used in 4 groups, with one towing and others self-propelled. The second model was 100 feet long, with a 20.5-foot beam and sides of 12 feet and a capacity of 400 tons. These were typically used in groups of 5, with another tugboat pulling them. The third model has the exact dimensions of the second, but is similar to the old Erie Canal boats, with box-like lines. These could carry 500 tons individually. The fourth and last type of boat used was the steel motor. These were 256 feet long, with a 36-foot beam, 14-foot sides, and a capacity of 1,600 tons. These were mainly used to carry grain and could travel by themselves, but they wouldn't be traveling for long. Well, the New York State Barge Canal achieved remarkable success, laying a strong commercial foundation for countless towns along its route. Progress is never immune to the passage of time. As new technologies and transportation methods emerged, the canals faced mounting challenges, signaling the end of their golden era and the beginning of a new chapter in the story of American infrastructure. Unfortunately, despite its glory, the Barge Canal experienced a significant decline in the later part of the 20th century into the 21st. One crucial detail is that the St. Lawrence Seaway opened in 1959. It was a collaboration between the United States and Canada, located not too far north of New York's barge system. This new system of waterways, designed for larger vessels, captured much of the traffic that might have otherwise taken on this complex route. And by the 1970s, trucks were used to transport most of the resources and products throughout the USA. This development was a direct result of the completion of the interstate highway system back in 1955. Thus, much of the water traffic was being moved onto land. Another sign of changing times, although perhaps more symbolic, was when the New York State Barge Canal began to be referred to as the New York State Canal System, with each branch of this extensive collection being referred to as a separate entity, such as the Erie Canal, Oswego Canal, etc. This move made each canal system like a piece of the past rather than a part of the future. And so it was. On one day in 1994, the last reoccurring commercial ship, the Peckinpah, ran its final route. Thus, the previous wonder that was the New York State Barge Canal became little more than a fading memory. Today, while the New York State Barge Canal system no longer supports the massive commercial activity that it once did, the waterways remain a vital part of the specific landscape. Steeped in a history of American progress spanning multiple eras, the New York State Barge Canal system remains too significant to fade away entirely. It now serves as a living historical landmark, offering visitors a glimpse into the past, attracting tourists to its surrounding areas, tourists who bring a modest boost to the New York economy. Most of the machinery from the canal system's heyday is still in use, but for recreational purposes. Many sites, such as the bridges and locks, have stood the test of time. By visiting these areas and the surrounding towns, vacationers and travelers can get a sense of what America was when it was in its rise. It's also impressive that the infrastructure remains despite occasional disasters. Consider the 2006 floods, which caused approximately $15 million in damage. Similarly, Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee in 2011 shut down the canal system temporarily. Yet it was fully restored and operational again by the year of 2012. Today, you can purchase a permit to travel the canals through the locks and lift bridges via recreational watercraft. And there's a lot to see. One particularly beautiful site is known as the Long Branch Amusement Park. The area offered attractions, including boxing arenas and even a trolley that closed in 1938. But if you're into more modern attractions, just south of this body of water is Destiny USA, the largest mall in Syracuse. Beyond that, there is the Oriskany Battlefield State Historic Site, which commemorates the 1777 battle which occurred during the American Revolution. The waterworks here date back to when the Erie Canal was first devised. Lock 20 at State Canal Park is the marker of this engineering wonder. And we'll leave it there for today, but if you enjoyed this story, don't miss our episode about the Erie Canal by clicking right here. And hit the subscribe button here to help us hit that 750,000 subscriber landmark before the end of 2025, I hope. Otherwise, until next time, guys, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off. Okay, I said hope funny, I know, but I'm not going to do it a million more times. You guys don't know what I go to make these videos. And then you complain about my pronunciation, don't you? All right. See, you got some behind the scenes. See ya.